and welcome to Experience, your new weekly podcast where we get to psychoanalyze the news. We take those news headlines and we use it to decipher why people behave the way that they do. Luckily for you, you don't just get my take on it, you get an actual expert. His name is Professor Peter Kinderman. Hello and welcome to our show yet again, Peter.
Hi there.
It's always wonderful to have you. How has your week been?
My week's been up and down with trips and visits, and then
To a theme park?
a restorative lie-in on Sunday morning. So I'm feeling okay.
You see, I can't lie in anymore. How did you manage that?
Kids somewhere else, plenty of time, turn the phone off, and it just happened. It was a remarkable gift from nature.
Oh, that is wonderful. Was it also a gift from a few libations maybe that helped out?
Not overdoing it on the intoxication front, but I needed to catch up on my sleep because I'd been camping and I'd been to a friend's, and you don't sleep well in other people's beds, and so I probably needed the extra sleep.
Yeah, camping and me, I really don't get much sleep. I have to have full-on eye mask, the whole works. I'm rubbish. Like, some people can just sleep anywhere. My husband's one of those people who can sleep on a plane or on a train. Whereas me, if I'm not in my bed with my pillow, then useless. I'm not sure I'd have evolved, actually, if I was born at any other time where there wasn't duvets, pillows and a decent mattress.
Quite right. Yeah, absolutely. And I vowed many years ago never to go camping again, and then was convinced that I should change my mind by a woman. It's just the way things go.
Yeah, and also just when you have young kids, it's kind of, you have to do it. You have to go through that punishment. I think that's what it is. Although I do like a good camp and a good picnic, so that always makes you feel better. My week was a joyful week. I spent 8 hours in A&E. That's always a gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? Yes. And what I discovered was, people talk about the younger generation as having no patience. Have a smartphone, they'll sit there forever on TikTok. Mine were fine. It was me who was starting to get really kind of like, okay, why are we still waiting? And why are there just 4 people in X-ray chatting for the last 45 minutes? Oh, and now they're now they're going home. Great. So I was getting quite chippy and they were entirely relaxed. Why have they got more patience than me?
Could it be morphine?
He did have some Oromorph, but not till right at the end, to be fair.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
so a broken leg, we've got an operation coming up. That'll be nice. So I'll
parents worry about their children. And if your mother's worrying about you, you don't have to, so you can concentrate on TikTok. You're there to absorb the angst. It's your role in life.
Great. I really am so pleased with my life choices right now. Today, we're going to be talking about some tragic stuff and some more interesting, fun stuff as well. On this week's show, coming up, we're going to be talking about the tragic death of Professor Arde and the public shaming that has really been to pass over the last couple of weeks. Then we're going to be talking about the awe and splendour of a partial eclipse. Before we go on, to say, well done, Nigel Farage, you managed to beat a bin. That's all coming up in our show, and we're going to, as ever, get the psychological take. But if we could start our show this week with your concept of the week, Peter. What is that?
So the concept of the week is related to the idea of explanations and attributions, the way that we explain things. And it's a bit complicated and a bit kind of academic, but as well as wonderful. There was a Scottish philosopher called Mackie who came up with something called INUS. And INUS stands, I think, if I can remember, for insufficient and unnecessary, but they're still causes. So it's kind of summed up as it's probably much more complicated than you think it is. So he raised the idea of what caused a fire. Then you go, well, it was petrol and a match. But you wouldn't have needed petrol if you got an old newspaper, and you wouldn't have needed a match if you got a cigarette lighter. So the petrol and the match, neither of them were necessary, and neither of them were sufficient for the fire, and yet they were still causes. And it kind of changes the way that we think about causes. And it changes the way that we think about how to explain the things that happen in life. There's probably a lot more going on, and it's probably a lot more complicated, and it's certainly a lot less definitive than we think it is. And that includes, human frailties. So if somebody fails to do something and tragedy ensues, there's a temptation to say that it's all down to them. But Mackie would say, well, there's a lot more going on. There are reasons why reasons happen, and the reasons might have been one of many things that could have caused that tragic chain of events. It happened to be that one, but there's something about the sort of moral philosophy of it. It helps to think things could have been very different and still come up with the same outcome.
So is this a bit like when people say that Brexit or the rise of the far right is simply a reaction against foreigners? It's kind of a racist thing where what's going on most likely is much more complicated and often can stem from kind of the financial inequalities in life. Is that what it means? That you just need to look deeper and deeper into what's going on?
Yeah. So one of the conversations about these sorts of consequences, if you look on Wikipedia, they talk about it with the sinking of the Herald of Free Enterprise when there was a tragedy and quite a few people died. And the idea of, why should this tragedy have happened? And then working back the causality of why would the storage tanks flood with water, and why would there be no bulkheads between the compartments, and why would the doors have been left open, and why would it have been nose heavy, and these sorts of questions. Similar things with things like tragedies with aircraft crashes and moon landings and so forth. And the idea would be that it relates to insurance as well. If you've got a house that's got many combustible things in it, then that's a risk, because any number of things could start the fire. It's the same as the warning about barbecues and not having outdoor fires during a heat wave. Is if the hills are combustible, many things could cause the fire. So we should avoid all of those risks. When it comes to things like the rise of fascism, I think, yes, it does apply, which is there will always be an excuse. I mean, in a way, the analogy, the metaphor is correct. There'll always be a spark that will light the fire. So what we've got is, and it relates to other things we're going to talk about today, if people are looking for something to have a culture war about, we will always find something that we can tweet and harass people over. There will always be that stuff around. So any particular incident has to be seen in the context of the circumstances in which it's being debated.
I thought it was quite interesting, the whole high alert, because I was sat in A&E at the time and everyone's pages started going off. And then again, they happened again a little bit later. But everyone, all of the staff, all of the nurses, they were sort of discombobulated by it. I think having it go off in a hospital made them much more nervous about what the consequences of it were. What did you think about getting that alert? Did you think it was OTT or pretty sensible?
I thought it was pretty sensible, and it made me, I'm sorry, I'm maybe a little bit dull, but it made me think, from what I know of these things, there is almost certainly quite a degree of civil service behind it. So there will have been a series of messages discussed by people without much of a political agenda. They're saying, what is the risk of death here? What is the risk of major property damage? What's the probability? Is there anything that we can do? And only then would somebody in politics be advised. And my experience of it, which is limited, is they were probably advised very directly, as in, we have policies that say an alert should go out under the following circumstances. It is our judgment, Prime Minister, that those circumstances have been met. We strongly advise you to put out an alert, rather than some sort of game playing by politicians.
Well, and also, 18 houses did burn down.
Absolutely.
It's not small beer, is it?
It's not small beer. And we've had a fire just outside Manchester that took days to come under control. Had firefighters die when they're confronting fire. So it made me, the backwards logic made me think, the fire service is probably finding that they are at considerable risk. And yes, we should all take a moment to be cautious about that.
Well, and, on our Nextdoor app, the local app where everyone sort of grosses everyone else up, there was quite a lot of consternation because in the woods just across the road from me, a lady had been spotted on several days nipping across in there a bit furtively. So perhaps had meant to have given up smoking and actually hadn't, and was clocked having a cigarette and then putting it out on the floor of the woods. And of course, people are like, oh, my goodness, you must not do that because you could start a fire and the woods are very close to a number of houses. But yeah, so still behaviour isn't exactly where you want to be. And this was a perfectly rational kind of, my age kind of woman who was doing that behaviour. And so hasn't been seen since. Perhaps a little bit of kind of public, hello, please don't do this, helps.
Yeah, it also tells the rest of us that if people are smoking and putting out cigarettes, we'll check for them that they've been put out, because that would just be a sensible thing to do.
Absolutely. Okay, so we're going to move on, and we're going to move on to the tragic death of Professor Ade. And this absolutely saddened me so much when I was waiting in A&E and got that news alert through. As a mum of kids who've got, who are on the autistic spectrum, I really did feel for the level of public shaming that happened for Professor Ade. And I just want to make clear that, our thoughts are with his family and his friends, because really it seemed quite disproportionate to me what that man went through compared to what the alleged crimes might have been. And there's quite a lot of chat that perhaps this was racism induced or that academia is inherently racist. There's been a number of people who've spoken out straight away, pretty much. Andy Burnham talked about it being a tragedy and asked people not to rush to judgment and said it should be a time of reflection. The first ever Black cabinet minister said racism in academia is a fact of life and needs to be addressed. So I'd like your point on that in a minute. Now, Professor Ade lived in Battersea with his family. So Sadiq Khan said that this was an unacceptable public hounding and campaign of abuse, and said that Ade was a victim of pernicious shaming. And of course, shaming is what Thomas Wyatt, the poet, said was a punishment worse than death. It was the greatest punishment you can give another person. What does being publicly shamed do to someone?
Well, I think that you're absolutely right. Shame is pernicious and absolutely harmful. I think that there are some elements of, I suppose, people who have both a public profile where shame is obviously more, if you're known. Well, one of the things about Ade is that he wasn't actually known until people started shaming him, which is terrible. But if you're known, you're in the public eye, or people put you in the public eye. And I think there's something about academia where people's name and CV and achievements are very closely connected. It's them and it's their personality and their identity. And you quoted Wyatt, which I think is spot on. It's a way of trying to harm people. And I think we all know that. I mean, we've all been shamed. Most of us, probably, certainly most people I know have been bullied. We know what it's like to feel shame. And the choice to do that to somebody else is quite a cruel one. So I think there's an element here of people being deliberately shaming. The take that I found most positive about this tragedy was actually Chris Pattons, who's the Chancellor of the university, who was saying both that if people raise concerns about somebody's performance in an academic job, especially one that does have some sort of public significance, like a professor at a major university, then that should be investigated. But you do it without shaming and without rushing to judgment. And I think he's right. That's exactly it. You mentioned just then, Hilary, about proportion. And there are people on social media who are saying, well, I'm sorry he's dead, but almost as if taking your own life is proportionate to an unproven challenge about the authenticity of some of your work on your CV. And I looked it up before I came on the show, just to be clear. So you've not only got people like Toby Jones and his history when it comes to academia, but if you look at the stats, if you look at the police records, 30% of 41-year-old men in the UK have a criminal conviction.
Whoa!
So that's not including road traffic offences. So now you got to think, what level of hounding is appropriate? So it might be the case that none of those people are journalists, that there is not a single journalist out of the 30% of the population who's got a criminal conviction. But I doubt it, really. Then maybe those journalists who do have a criminal conviction wisely stay away from the shaming more. But I doubt it. And then you've got to think, even if that's true, what are we saying? That mistakes that are spotted, addressed and responded to are then unforgivable. So I like the Chris Patton approach because it says we don't know what's going on. And if there was something going on, then the appropriate authorities will take the appropriate reasonable steps. And it is something of your business, but you can just wait a bit and see how the panoply plays out. Whereas what we got was people who had absolutely no idea of what they were talking about, had never known the man, had never sat on a PhD viva, had never sat on a research misconduct committee, were passing judgment over somebody whose death they appeared to care nothing about. And that's where the racism comes in, because it does seem as if a dead black man is relatively unimportant compared to a point that they want to make on Twitter.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. We do have a very essential tenet in this country and in other countries around the world, which is that you're innocent until you're proven guilty. But social media has wiped that away.
I think we also have a general tenet of proportionality. So I think, I've certainly made mistakes, not only in my personal life, but in my career. I think the people around me know about the mistakes I've made and authorities know about the mistakes I've made, and things have been addressed. So, we address these things and we learn from them. I suspect that's true for most people. I suspect most people have had their bosses give a quiet word to them. There's quite a lot of retractions in the general media, corrections. The Guardian famously has its corrections column. There are changes of mind. There are people saying, I didn't realise this at the time. That people make mistakes all of the time. And I think it's both terrible when mistakes are responded to disproportionately, when they're responded to in a way that looks like it's absolutely deliberate shaming is disproportionate. And I think the race element does come into it in this occasion.
What do the people who commit the public shaming, those who are lighting the torches and, chucking the incendiary out on social media or indeed in actual real life, what did they gain from that behaviour? Well,
so in the course of my career, I've been on social media putting forward various views that I think are correct, because otherwise I wouldn't say them, and certainly defensible. And people have been very vitriolic in the public debate about things that I've said. And, I read their comments carefully and I talk to their colleagues about it and sometimes complain to the authorities about their behaviour. The message coming back is they think they're morally in the right. So in a sense, they're saying they think your behaviour is outrageous and outrageous behaviour should be confronted. They might even think that behaviour is outrageous and therefore that behaviour is so outrageous that it warrants I would say, outrageous response. So that's what they say. They would say it is outrageous that Kinderman is allowed to put forward such outrageous views in such an outrageous fashion. The consequence is terrible. And we can think of what people would argue about the consequences of inappropriate appointments to senior professorships might be consequential in terms of educational privilege and so forth, educational standards and so forth. So people are saying that this behaviour is outrageous and therefore I am outraged and I will give you my outrage. I don't really buy it. And I don't buy it in this case because of the race element. I also don't buy it because they appear not to know anything about what they're talking about, and yet they're outraged. And I think, why not? It's a strong opinion of mine that one of the defining features of human psychology, and it certainly defines my politics, is the balance between selfishness, sort of competitiveness, and generosity. And I think I would conclude that probably those people who express outrage about another person's behaviour in this sort of context aren't very generous. They're prepared to harm others. They're prepared to put forward points of view which it seems that they're not very concerned about the consequences or even whether they're right or wrong. So it seems a selfish attitude to me. I feel some outrage, therefore I'm going to shame you. I don't care how it lands with you. And you hear that with people like Toby Young and Julia Hartley-Brewer in saying, well, yes, but. And if somebody's died, you don't say but.
Well, I would definitely agree with that. I wonder, though, whether it is also that people feel bigger as a result of doing this, getting on that moral high horse, whether suddenly it just sort of boosts them up and makes them feel better as a result of doing it. But also, hasn't it just the social norms have changed? Since we've had Trump in the White House, all of a sudden it's completely okay in public discourse to be rude publicly to other people. There used to be a situation where you weren't allowed to do that sort of thing, that people in positions of responsibility and in power didn't behave in that way. And now it's kind of been sanctioned from the top. If the President of the United States can behave in such an irresponsible way with their words, then why shouldn't we? This is what you do. This is
Absolutely.
how you handle people you don't agree with.
I mean, leadership is important. One of the things when I became a university lecturer, I was told quite straightforwardly that if you're in front of a class of 120 people and the fire alarm goes off, then sort it out, because they'll all be looking to you for leadership. Mm-hmm. And it's simply true. If you're sitting in an audience and the lecturer carries on lecturing, you'll sit in the audience. And so leadership in politics, I think that's one of the reasons why political leadership, anti-Burnham, Trump and so forth, is actually important. The leadership is about moral leadership as well as just making policies. So I think you're right about Trump and those expressions. I think there's also an element whereby social media, we haven't caught up with social media. So one of the things in professional sort of misconduct issues involving social media, one of the benchmarks that the judges of these cases are asked to consider is, would it be unacceptable if you said it at a louder than normal speaking voice on a crowded train platform? And that people say utterly outrageous things on Twitter, that if they said it in the committee room of a major corporation would lead to their dismissal. So we haven't caught up with the fact that just because you can type it into Twitter drunk at 3 a.m. doesn't mean it's acceptable. And we need to guard for that. I think that the point about bigging yourself up, I mean, that's the point of racism. It's the point of the far right politics at the moment, which is that if you've got policies which would actively disadvantage lower than average income earners, how can you get lower than average income voters to vote for you, even though your policies are absolutely inexplicably bad for them? And what you say is, we'll help you gang up on somebody even worse than you. And there are a large number, because of this divide between generosity and competition, there are sadly a large number of people who go, I quite like hating other people because it makes me feel better about myself, or at least not as bad. At least I'm better than them. And if you have lots of messages saying those people are worthless and you're not those people, it's a very false sort of message, but it's a message that doesn't appeal to people.
Hate and feeling bad about other people and not feeling generous of spirit always makes me feel, tired and grumpy, and my quality of life is not good when I'm angry at other people. It is so much better if I'm trying to worry about what I can change and what I can do to make things better, rather than be frustrated at everything else going on. Surely all this collective hate on Twitter must be doing something quite damaging to society, don't you think? To our health, to our well-being.
I think we would be all a lot better off if we hadn't developed social media in the way that we have. We'd all be a lot better off if there was some system whereby we were exposed to this sort of stuff only for limited periods, possibly, at the right time of day. I think on the whole, I suppose it's a little bit like Alco Pops, which is, I can see why people buy them, but I'd rather they didn't exist.
Yeah, good point. I like that. I think that's right. Okay, well, if you've been affected by anything that we've talked about today, then we've got notes of where you can get some help in our show notes. So click on that and you'll find some places to go. Moving on then from that terrible story, it's so sad, to the partial eclipse. Were you enchanted by the partial eclipse?
No. Thoroughly underwhelmed.
This is something awesome, and you were thoroughly underwhelmed.
Yeah.
May I suggest you were underprepared and you didn't have the right equipment?
We had a variety of eclipsoscopes. We went onto a patch of kind of common ground where we had a beautiful view of the setting sun in the western sky. We were there appropriately socially distanced from other people, but there were quite a lot of people there. It was a nice collective atmosphere. There's some, people with a few drinks, people with calendars, which is great, people with viewing scopes of various kinds. Met a friend, and after a few minutes, she said, when's it going to happen then? And we went, it was 5 minutes ago. And we were talking all the way along. I didn't exactly miss it. It was like we were, kind of looking at it and taking projections of it, and the sky dimmed a little bit. We went, oh, right. where you go, oh, look, you can see a big chunk of it taken out. And you, oh, yeah, that's interesting. And then we went back to the conversation about, I don't know, Tupperware or whatever it was. So, no, I'm sorry. I'm just going to be honest. Yep. It was mildly underwhelming.
Yeah, well, I actually quite enjoyed it. Now, obviously, the sky did not really go dark, certainly not in West Sussex. It didn't go dark at all. And actually, until we put on our glasses, because we were standing around going, oh, when's it going to happen? Put on our glasses, like, oh, okay, it's nearly over. I mean, astonishing how much light still comes off when you've got the majority of the sun blocked out by the moon.
So I live in Manchester, and it's cloudy quite a lot of the time. So the idea that the sun is shining at only 5% of its magnitude is kind of not, maybe that's the reason. But 2 days later,
that explains it.
2 days later, I was in North Wales, out in the countryside, staring up at the night sky, looking for Perseid meteorites, and thought that was absolutely wonderful. So it's not like I'm veering on the Brian Cox scale. I'm a solid 8 on the Brian Cox scale. I think the majesty of the universe is wonderful, but I didn't get it with the partial eclipse. Sorry.
You see, we quite enjoyed it, watching it, I have to say, so much so that I've actually booked to go to Spain next year. I'm becoming a bit of a budding eclipse chaser. Now, there are people who get absolutely addicted and go around the world. Why are people getting addicted to it? I mean, I know I liked it and think, they might as well book my holiday by it, because I remember the one in 1999, and that really was impressive. But why are people literally trekking miles off route into the middle of forests and woodland and to the edge of the earth to be able to see these things? Why do people get hooked on it?
Well, I would. And after the eclipse, we went, well, that was all right, but it was a bit underwhelming. Well, maybe we'll go to South Africa next year, and actually, I think it's next year or the year after, and do exactly the trip, the sort of trek that you're talking about, because that would be spectacular. I mean, I'm not saying eclipses aren't spectacular. I'm saying that wasn't an eclipse. It was a partial eclipse, and partial eclipses are only partially spectacular. Why would we do it? We go camping. Yeah, you go camping and you sit in nature and you look at the hills and you think, well, this is wonderful. And then you sit in nature and you look at the night sky and you think, this is amazing. And you have a conversation about distant galaxies and space aliens. And then a few Perseid meteorites come through and you go, oh, wow, I just saw one. And you sit there for another 15 minutes waiting for another one. And the eclipse is that, but much bigger and more powerful. And it brings all of that wonder of nature together.
So is eclipses actually a big enough draw for you to go back camping? I mean, you had a camping holiday not that long ago and you were entirely underwhelmed by it. But is it back on the cards at another camping site? Have you forgotten the hell already?
Well, I'm prepared, being a generous sort of person, I'm prepared to go through the hell of camping if those close to me want to go through the hell of camping, and then I'll sign up and say yes. Would I choose to do it? I would probably choose a decent 4-star hotel with a dark nights policy over camping. I'd probably prefer camping to not seeing an eclipse. Yeah, I'd go through camping for an eclipse. Yeah, even
I'm
with the 95%
that.
Probability that it'll rain, I still do.
And I mean, I didn't stay up for the meteor shower, so I'm glad that you did out of the two of us. I don't even like fireworks, and yet there was something about this that I found quite mesmerising. And what I found out was that in 585 BC, on the 28th of June, I think it was, but we know the date exactly, if I could just remember it, that literally a 6-year war was brought to the end when there was an eclipse in the sky. I mean, that's going something. There is a collective psychological effect of eclipses on the population, isn't it? Not just on the individual, but collectively. What's going on with people there?
Well, the stories that we're told, and if we assume that they're true, is that, you know, people are so aware of the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun that this has become just a fixed point in our existence. And then when it gets disrupted by an eclipse, there's something extraordinary and dangerous happening. That, you know, the world is being turned in a way that we very fundamentally don't understand, and therefore it's a profound event for us. I mean, the stories also tell, when we read the history books of whether they're fantasy, which they sometimes are, or whether they're true, that the wise people of the community knew that the eclipse was coming, and therefore they could predict it, and therefore there's the sort of superstition and wonder of the populace and the power of the people with the access to mathematics.
Thousands of years ago, they had like actual sort of hand-turning computer-type machines to be able to predict what the sky was doing at any one time, which is really quite astonishing, isn't it? To the level of detail that people had handed down that information about the movement of stars.
So like I said, I'm a solid 8 on the Brian Coxometer, and I quite like astronomical things, and I quite like thinking about distant stars. I know where the sun rises because I know where the pattern of light shines through my bedroom window. But if you took me to Salisbury Plain and gave me 14 large stones and said, set them up so that on the longest day of the year, the sun shines through the axis of your construction, I wouldn't have a hope in hell. But these people 6,000 years ago were able to do that. So, yeah, I mean, well, one of the things there, incidentally, is they were just as intelligent as we are. I mean, when Stonehenge was built, there's been no evolution, none to speak of in human brains since then. So one of the things I quite like about sitting outside and looking at the skies is that I have a conversation with other university-educated friends about all sorts of sophisticated ideas about the night sky. The people before Stonehenge was built had just as sophisticated analysis of the situation that we did. Their brains were just as clever. They weren't grunting at each other in a sort of subhuman idiocy. They were very, very clever people thinking about their world, and I think that's miraculous.
It is astounding to think of it in those terms, but perhaps we've reached peak intelligence, haven't we? Is there any indication that our intelligence is actually declining with the
there is indeed
advent of technology and things?
So sort of, starting around 1772, Rights of Man, Thomas Paine, French Revolution, all of this, we started to invent this thing called democracy, which meant that for future generations, we can look at today's culture and think there's a system by which the adult human beings can select the best and most fitted of their kind to serve as a benchmark of progress. And we've elected Donald Trump and a bin. So, obviously, given that that's a bad idea, we're on the decline now. I think we just, like a roller coaster, except it's all going to go to hell.
Okay, if we're moving on to the bin, let's move on to the bin. Because you say electing a bin would be a bad idea. Did you see Binface's policy in the Clacton by-election?
I didn't read them all in detail. I knew he'd promised to build one affordable home, but yeah.
There was this one I think you'd agree with, nationalising the songs of Adele so that you actually get to have the profits going into the NHS rather than into some fat cat corporations. I thought you'd like that. Moving a pub Pendry in Uxbridge, I'm kind of like, I need to see the landscape there. But my favourite, enforcing a 99p price on a 99 ice cream.
I think it's an instant winner. There's no time I've been queuing up for an ice cream and seen 99s on the list without saying they should be 99p. It's just a fact.
You see?
Yeah.
He's tapped into the psyche here. Come on.
If necessary, we should use
Binface.
taxpayers' money to subsidise the price of 99s. And then, kids would be reasonably well fed on fake fat and sugar, I suppose, but at least they get some calories. So, yeah.
I have to say, an ice cream a day, I think, would make everyone happier. Maybe a bit fatter, but maybe not fatter. Maybe because I reckon an ice cream might be better than some of the treats out there.
Well, you could have an ice cream in a 3-kilometre run and you'd be fine. I think it's nearly perfect. I quite like the idea, or because I don't agree with him, I quite like the idea of Farage staging stunts that get his comeuppance. I mean, I hesitated during saying that because we were talking about shaming earlier, and I actually don't want Farage to be shamed. I would really like it if Farage just simply left.
Well, I don't think there's any chance that he has been part of the political landscape for many decades now, and is quite rightly probably now starting to be perceived as a little bit of the institution already.
I mean, what I would say to him is that if he's going to stage a stunt and there's a bin involved, then it's almost his choice to put himself through that. So he's more like a contestant on It's a Knockout than a political campaigner.
Isn't he a former contestant from the jungle?
Well, exactly, yeah. Probably, eating sheep's testicles or kangaroo testicles. I mean, I think that one of the things that it's... I mean, I'm not a particularly patriotic person, but it does make me think, wow, Britain's got some kind of like nice traditions. And the idea of asking permission from Rachel Reeves whether he might please resign, her saying, well, if you really want to fight a bin, I'll let you resign then, with the kind of supposition that she could have refused, but she's going to let him humiliate himself. And then the idea of crowing repeatedly after having won the election against a bin, only to find himself back in the mire with the Parliamentary Standards Authority.
Yeah, when he has got that coming up.
If it does end up with the Parliamentary Standards Authority saying that there has to be a rerun of the election in Clacton, that would just be heaven. I'm willing for 260,000 or whatever it is to stage a by-election of taxpayers' money to be spent just to let that process do its, stately course through politics.
Well, I'm sure if there was another by-election, there will not be the record 34 candidates that there was this time, which made them have the most expensive ballot paper, I think, ever of all time. But only 2 of them did get their money back, because you have to reach the threshold of 500 to be able to get your money back for standing in an election. And that was Binface and Farage. In his speech after, or his statement after winning, Farage was talking about, what an honour it was that he'd been re-elected by Clacton with an increased majority than last time. So in 2024, I think he got 21,225 votes, and he has added 14 to that total. So he's now at 22,239,000 votes, with a bin as really the only main contender. Binface did all right. He got 9,455 votes, which actually wasn't as much. Do you know that when he stood in the last 2 mayoral elections, guess how many votes he got when he stood in the last 2?
Absolutely no idea.
Ballpark figure, any ideas?
Oh, I wouldn't like to guess, but I would expect less than 1,000.
24,000 votes. So Binface is actually, he's on the move. It would be interesting to see whether he could make any more national policies that perhaps people might be interested in. Anyway.
Well, but you see, I mean, there are links with, it's more complicated than that, and INUS and so forth in all of this. So the alerts, I think politicians who get elected into high office, they're going to get people vociferously disagreeing with them, and there's not an awful lot they can do about that. And people will be outraged by what they see as a very simple issue. And they're outraged because the person enacting the decisions isn't A, seeing it from their point of view, and B, isn't saying it's really, really simple. And the reason is it's not really, really simple.
Back to the concept of the week.
Yeah.
Remind us again, what was that called?
Well, it's called INUS, and it's the idea that the causes of events are sometimes neither necessary nor sufficient. There's just a whole melange of factors that make the event more likely to happen in any given circumstances. And so what you've got is people sitting down a pub going, that alert was just ridiculous. And you go, well, yeah. And, the most cogent criticism of the alert that I've heard is that if you, especially women, if you have a secret phone around the house that you use in case your partner is going to be violent to you so you can call for a taxi to get out of the house, it will have gone off and your partner now knows that you've got a secret phone, and that's dangerous. That's quite a cogent argument. If I was Andy Burnham and civil servants were saying, there's 18 houses destroyed, we've got firefighters who are now, it's difficult to get rotations for them because they're on alert all the time, there's a high risk of major property damage or, infrastructure damage. But on the other hand, we're putting people at risk. He can't win, can he? He can't come out of it without somebody being offended. If you've got instances of people in high-profile academic jobs where sitting down the pub after point number 3, it's obvious to you that that person should not have done that thing, then you'll get offended. And so for people voting for Binface, I think there's quite a lot of people who say, oh, for God's sake, why are all of these people so stupid? The answer's obvious. We'll kick out the Muslims.
Yeah, well, lots of people do make that kind of connection, don't they, as we know, and really it's very sad. Well, we've had an interesting romp through the headlines this week, I think, especially getting back to our idea around doing our camping at some point in the future. Before we move off this podcast for the week, could you perhaps let us have a tip to try, something that is going to make us a bit calmer, perhaps a little bit saner as we go forward for the rest of our week?
Well, it's a really simple thing and it's a really obvious thing. And I'm slightly embarrassed for saying it because it's too simple of obvious, which is just wait a second before responding to things. just with everything, really. I think it's easy to go, I've seen a headline, I absolutely know what the answer is, and it's obvious to me that those people are idiots, so here's the answer. And it's probably more complicated than that. There's always stuff that you don't know. There's always things going on that you're not aware of. There's always a backstory to these things. And the simple solution often has consequences that you're not aware of when you're just spouting nonsense. And other people's perspectives are often valid. And I think at all things, even making a declaration that you're never going to go camping again, just have a think, I'm probably not to go camping again, but if there's a good argument, then I might consider it. Just take a moment before concluding things. And that means, it means on news stories, waiting and hearing the evidence, finding out what's going on, letting investigations run their course, assuming that there might be reasons why people do what they do, including things like, police investigations and news stories. I think that the world is so complicated, and the stories of human beings are so enmeshed with each other. Simple answers coming across the headlines are nearly always simplistic, and I think we should wait a moment before deciding what we're going to do on a day-to-day basis, and certainly we should wait a moment before forming our own minds about big news stories. And we should absolutely, definitely, it's not even we should wait a moment before sending a tweet. Just don't send a bloody tweet, because it'll almost certainly be wrong.
Yes, or an X, whatever they're called. Luckily, I don't go anywhere near that platform, especially not since Musk decided to get into bed with the octogenarian in the White House.
That's a horrible idea.
I shall leave you with that image.
The image is burned into my occipital lobes now.
Well, luckily for me, I've got aphantasia, something we need to talk about in the future. Okay. So I don't get to see any of those pictures, so I can say it with impunity. Next week, we will be back and we'll be discussing more headlines. If you have anything in particular that you would like us to cover, we would love to hear from you. Thank you very much, Peter, for a great week, and we look forward to seeing you again next week.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
The Experience podcast is hosted by Hilary Jeffs and Peter Kinderman, produced by James Jones at Granary Digital. You can find us on social media, and you can get in touch by email at hello@experiencepodco.com with any questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to cover. And don't forget to leave us a review.